Hi, this is Deanna Kosaraju, founder of Global Tech Women. Welcome back to Voices 2017. We're on the last day and we're talking about our own success and our ability to have compassion, which is such a critical importance to our joy and well-being, as well as to our success. So with that, I would like to introduce you to Virginia Hunter Sampson. She is an author, speaker, and attorney. You can read more about her on our website. We're really excited to have her speaking on this very important topic today. A couple of housekeeping things. There is a chat window that you can launch at the bottom of your screen. It says chat. You can go ahead and ask your questions in this chat window. I will be monitoring it during the session for Virginia. If you have any questions, as well, please introduce yourself and other activities. So with that, I will turn it over to Virginia. Go ahead, Virginia.
Sorry, my screen got frozen for a minute. So hello, everyone. And I do want to talk to you about compassion, which seems like a strange topic when you're considering your success, at least in terms of your professional life. But it does create success in all areas of your life, including for your businesses, as a leader, as an employee, whatever part of your life you feel may be lacking. Compassion is probably what's missing. So let me tell you a little bit about how I came to be interested in compassion. I don't remember thinking about it much growing up. It was just kind of a subject for church. But I think we lived in communities maybe where it was more an integral part of our life. People didn't move. We had the same neighbors for 40 and 50 years. So when I was divorced and I remarried, and my second husband was diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, when my youngest child was 2 weeks old. And I didn't really think much about how I was going to cope with it during the time, or who was going to really be there for me. I wish I had. But I had 4 children at the time, 3 teenagers and a 2-week-old. And we kind of muddled through. And I got to the end of it, and I didn't realize, by the time we got to the end of my husband's illness, it lasted about 3 years. And I don't know if you're familiar with Lou Gehrig's disease, but they call it the coffin disease, because at the end, basically, you can't move. It doesn't affect you mentally at all, but you have no ability to move or speak, and eventually you can't breathe. So we had no visitors. It seems like the worse my husband's condition got, the fewer the visitors that came. My children were acting out their pain and grief at school, and the teachers, rather than being compassionate, were rather cruel to them. So I emerged from this, I didn't realize at the time, a little bit bitter and distrustful of the world. This based on some of the other challenges I had in my life, and I'm sure we've all had our challenges. So I started, when I finally realized that maybe I needed to do more healing. I thought I'd done a lot of healing, but I still had more work to do. I started writing about my experiences. And it's through my writing that I discovered compassion, and that it had been missing from my life during these critical times. And I discovered the healing power of it, and the ability to connect meaningfully to others, and it helps you flourish in your life. So that led me, after my personal experiences, that kind of led me to get interested in the science of compassion. And this compassion and happiness and all of the components of compassion are being studied at universities all over the country, in the United States and all over the world. It's a fascinating subject. It's no longer, quote, a soft topic, but a topic that they are able to verifiably research and establish the good things about compassion. So I took some classes at UC Berkeley. There's some conferences at Stanford. I've done a lot of reading. What I found is that this verifies my own experiences of compassion, and it's taken me to a whole new level in the understanding of the importance of compassion in our life. So I wanted to share some of this with you, because my goal is I hope to make a more compassionate world. And if we all would act compassionately in everything we do and with everyone we meet, compassion is contagious, and we could change the world. So what is compassion? So for a minute, maybe stop and think about, what does that mean to you? When have you maybe experienced it or not experienced it? Or do you really have anything other than a vague notion about what compassion is? So there's lots of terms around there. There's empathy, there's altruism. But compassion is different because compassion involves the ability to relate to someone else's suffering or to feel someone else's pain, but it's coupled with the desire to help that person. You want to help alleviate the pain. And you want to do that in a non-judgmental manner. Judgment has no place in compassion. You're there, you feel their pain, you want to help with whatever they may need. The word literally means to suffer with. I like the Buddhist definition, which says when love meets suffering and stays loving, that's compassion. And I'm sorry, I forgot to move on to my next screen on my PowerPoint. So we have two kinds, psychologists, this is a multidisciplinary study of compassion and happiness, but they've identified two types of compassion. So we obviously have compassion for others, but just as important and maybe more important is self-compassion, which is compassion for ourselves. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. I think especially for women, maybe we tend to focus a little bit more on compassion for others rather than compassion for ourselves. So the interesting thing about this part of the study of compassion is that we, in the business world, and I've been a litigation attorney for 35 years, so it's pretty cutthroat. And I've actually moved out of it to helping seniors because that just fits more with what I do. I can practice compassion in my law practice. But you get that feeling as a litigation attorney, and I think in a lot of fields, we've gotten the belief that we are programmed for survival of the fittest, right? So we have to beat everybody else out. We have to, if they gain, we're losing. And that's really not what we are biologically or evolutionarily programmed for. The scientists today are discovering deep roots of human goodness that totally dispel that myth. Compassion and benevolence are a part of our human nature, and they are rooted in our brains and biology. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But so it's hard to overcome that, but it's important to remember sometimes when we're operating in the world, we feel that sense of, oh my gosh, I can't help this person, or I've got to do better than him, or I've got to beat him or her out. Remember, that really goes against your nature, and I think that's one reason we can become unhappy in the business world. So there is an incredible mind-body connection. The compassion manifests itself in other positive emotions manifest themselves in our bodies, in our brains, in our organs. They create a sense of well-being, a longevity, increase our longevity, and it creates success in all areas of our life. The reason that we are programmed to be not survival of the fittest. They've done studies on this, particularly Dr. Keltner at the University at Berkeley has done some studying about the fact that we as a species have very vulnerable offspring and have had to develop had to be caregivers to care for our vulnerable offspring for many years, and we've had to form social connections to help care for our offspring is part of the roots of our biology for being a compassionate, caring species. Now, so the current thinking, again, keep that in mind that we aren't programmed for survival of the fittest. We are programmed to be caring and to help each other, all right? And that translates into our profession. As I was saying, survival of the fittest kind of makes us feel like we have to, beat the other person out, or their gain is our loss. And we are trained, I think, professionally, maybe in other areas of our lives currently, to be self-focused, okay? That's really being self-focused is a detriment in all areas of our life, including our professional life. It hurts more than it helps. And they've studied this. Everything that I'm pretty much telling you in my presentation is information that I have taken from social scientists, psychologists that have studied this. They've done studies, And they've established these findings through these studies, and they've been published either in books or in journals or articles. So the research suggests that self-focus can harm us in 4 ways. So it creates blind spots, which means that we can be blind to our own failings, our own shortcomings. So the people that are self-focused tend to take more risks. They tend to take on projects that maybe they don't have the ability to complete. And obviously that can negatively impact your performance, either as a leader, if you have your own business, or as an employee. If you've ever been involved in a relationship with someone that's totally self-focused, you know that it's really hard to have a relationship with someone that really thinks mostly about themselves and very little about anyone else. So being self-focused ruins your relationships. And as we'll see, one of the huge benefits of compassion is that it creates meaningful connections. And as most of us know, as we all know in business, it really is still about relationships. And the relationships you build are really important. And if you're self-focused, you're not going to be able to build those important relationships. It also makes you weak in the face of failure. People who are self-focused, their self-esteem is totally based on how well they perform. And if they fail at something, they don't see it as an opportunity to learn or to change or to pick themselves back up. They can go into a real tailspin. It also damages your health. And the reason for that, we'll talk about a little bit later, is because compassion and the opposite of that really builds your health. It damages your health because it creates a lot of stress for a lot of the reasons that we've just talked about. One of the huge ones is that you don't have meaningful relationships. So the benefits, if you practice compassion, and I'll talk in a little bit about what it means to practice compassion in terms of an organization and on a personal level, but on how that manifests itself, what you need to do to actually practice compassion in your workplace. So on a personal level, one reason that compassion makes you successful is it makes you pleasant and easy to work with. Who doesn't want to work with somebody that's, agreeable, that cares about how they feel, that wants to, help somebody else succeed? I mean, if you're on a project, or if you're a supervisor, or if you're a client, who are you going to want to work with in terms of the personality or the way they operate and conduct themselves personally and business-wise? It also increases your status. People, again, want to work with people that care about their success and about helping them get ahead. And they find that when you act compassionately, that your status, people think highly of you. It inspires loyalty and engagement, again, because you care about how other people are. They want to engage with you. They become very loyal to you because you care about something other than yourself. And it gives you enduring power. And that's another subject that we'll talk about in a little bit. What is true power? We think of power as the ability to manipulate, or maybe even, some in the history of business has been to kind of browbeat someone or force someone to do something that you want them to do. That really doesn't create enduring power. So here, true power is derived from the ability to influence other people and to empower other people. So think about, our social networks, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. I mean, part of that is how do you influence other people? Okay. Again, it's not a result of an ability to coerce or bully others. That's short term. Long term, you want to have the ability to influence them in a positive way. And again, research shows that influence comes from empathy, from giving, from being grateful what people contribute to you. It is best expressed by compassion and enhancing the well-being of others. And this is from Dr. Keltner, who's written a book called The Power Paradox, and I have a list of resources. But he has stated he's done 20 years of research in this field. This is kind of his seminal work. He's at UC Berkeley. And he says the key to enduring power is to stay focused on our people, prioritize other interests as much as your own, bring the good in others to completion, and do not bring the bad in others to completion. You take delight in the delight of others as they make a difference in the world. And again, that's part of compassion, not being self-focused, caring about other people, what happens to other people, wanting to help other people to succeed. The benefits, and that's on a personal level, but also for an organization. They've done a lot of research with organizations that have fostered a culture of compassion among their employees and their management. And they've discovered that the organizations that have a culture of compassion, the businesses, achieve significantly higher levels of organizational, including financial performance, customer satisfaction. They create a more collaborative work environment, and we know we're starting to discover, and I think the technology companies have discovered this, that collaborating strengthens your ability to complete a job. It results in more productive negotiations at work. We all have to negotiate in every part of our life, and if you're negotiating with employers or coworkers, or even clients, you have more productive negotiations when you operate from a culture at a place of compassion. It creates healthier and happier employees. I'll talk a little bit later about the health benefits in clients, because as I said earlier, the research shows that compassion is contagious. And it's interesting, they've done some studies that when your employees are happier, healthier, it actually spills over into your clients. So the team members that are led by empathetic managers work in a more productive, satisfying ways. They're less likely to be stressed out. And also, it creates a culture of safety. So that helps encourage the spirit of experimentation, which we know is so crucial for creativity. So those are the benefits to an organization. And that is, Kim Cameron at the University of Michigan is the one that has done the study. And these are his findings after doing a lot of research into this topic. So how do you create a culture at work? You have to care for and be interested, and maintain respect for your coworkers. If you're a leader, for your employees. And you can't fake it. You really have to care about them. You provide support for one another. You offer kindness and compassion when others are struggling. There's kind of that old myth that, when somebody starts failing, you're going to run in and finish the project and get all the kudos. That really is the opposite of creating a culture of compassion at work. When you see when someone's struggling, you go in and you help them. You inspire one another at work. You encourage each other to do good work. You emphasize the meaningfulness of the work. Sometimes you may not feel it's meaningful, but there's always something that you can find that's meaningful in the work. And if someone makes a mistake, you don't blame them. You forgive mistakes. You move on. You treat one another with respect, with gratitude, with trust and integrity. And these are the skills that will help to create a compassionate culture at work. And again, if you create a compassionate culture, you're going to see it in your bottom line. Productivity will be up. Financially, you'll do better. So we talked about creating a culture of compassion was going to have health benefits too. We know that, missed absences from work due to health-related issues is a huge cost for businesses. If you're an employee, sometimes you only have a certain number of sick days. So what are the health benefits of compassion? And they've done a lot of studying. This has been done all over the United States and even on a worldwide basis through research. The University of North Carolina, they've done a lot of this. So, when you care about other people, when you're not self-focused, when you care about how other people feel and you want to help them, and you operate from that place in your life, you will have health benefits. You will see biological and physical changes in your body. There's a huge mind-body connection. I think we've always been, I'm older maybe, but we were raised that your mind was one thing, your emotions were another, your body was another thing. That's so not true. The current research is that we are so mind-body connected. What you think really is reflected biologically in your body. So when you act compassionately, it actually reduces your levels of cellular inflammation. This is a study at the University of North Carolina. And cellular inflammation is what leads to a lot of diseases, including certain types of cancer. It also lowers your blood pressure and your heart rate. That's because of the vagus nerve. And I'll just touch on a little bit of the biology of this a little bit later on. It reduces your stress. It strengthens your immune system. It helps us recover from disease faster. And interestingly enough, it increases our longevity. So all of these that I'm talking to you about have all been established through research into the effect of compassion. And everybody has a different kind of take on how they get people to act compassionately or feel compassion. But I know UC Berkeley has done it, University of North Carolina, and a bunch of others have studied, have someone act compassionately and measure this. And it's been huge. It's pretty well generally accepted in the community right now that this is absolutely true. So how does compassion create these health benefits, right? I mean, compassion, believe it or not, is pleasurable. So it activates pleasure centers in the brain. They've done MRIs. When they have someone giving to someone else or an act of compassion, they're actually able to see in the MRI certain pleasure centers in the brain are activated. It helps decrease stress, which we know is associated with a variety of health issues. Because when it reduces the cortisol levels in your body, which is what's created when you're stressed out. It helps broaden our perspective beyond ourselves. And this is critical because research shows that depression and anxiety are linked to a state of self-focus, right? I mean, people who are self-focused tend to get more depressed and have more anxiety. So part of what compassion does for you, because remember, you're looking at another person, you're feeling their pain, you're getting outside of yourself to help them, then you think about someone else, you're not focused on yourself. And they're showing that really helps with depression and anxiety. And of course, compassion increases our sense of connection to others. This may be one of the most important things that it does, kind of the key point to why it's so beneficial for us. Because if you go back to what I was talking about, we are social creatures. We are biologically and evolutionary programmed to be social. As much as we have kind of, in my opinion, taken individualism to maybe an unhealthy level, that's not our nature. And so when we are connected to others, which is what compassion does, because again, we're caring about someone else, we're reaching out to help someone else, then it has huge health benefits. And studies have shown that a lack of social connection is a greater detriment to our health than obesity, smoking, and high blood pressure. And also that people who do not have social connections, strong social connections, or any social connections, are more prone to those diseases as well as to depression and anxiety. So. That strong social connections, in fact, lead to a 50% increase in longevity. And they've done a lot of studies with seniors mostly, and seniors that volunteer versus seniors that don't volunteer to help in the community. And it's interesting, the reason you volunteer has to be a reason, a compassionate reason. It can't be like something you have to do. But the people that volunteer live longer. When it comes from a place of compassion, they actually have a more fulfilling life also, but their longevity is increased by the act of giving to other people and helping other people. So I'll just briefly touch on the biology of compassion a little bit. So there's a lot of studies out there about how compassion impacts our brain chemistry and our biology. So I'm just going to touch on a few of the bigger ones here. So we have a vagus nerve that runs basically from the top of our head down to pretty much through our whole body. And they call it the caretaking nerve. So research, and a lot of this is done by Dr. Keltner at Berkeley, shows that when it's stimulated by an act of compassion, it actually reduces, so that's actually how your inflammation gets reduced. It strengthens your immune system, it lowers your heart rate, because it's connected to those organs. So it's connected to your heart, it's connected to a lot of organs, and when you engage in a compassionate act, that nerve is stimulated, and the benefits of that are what I have stated here. It's interesting that there's a study being done. Rheumatoid arthritis is obviously inflammation of the joints. And actually, they're studying some kind of a device that you place on the vagus nerve that stimulates it to actually reduce the inflammation associated with rheumatoid arthritis. And they've had some success with that. And the other one I want to talk about is oxytocin. So oxytocin is what they call the love hormone. All right, it's reduced during breastfeeding and sex, and it induces feelings of warmth, euphoria, and connection to others. So when you are acting compassionately, you create oxytocin, and oxytocin makes you feel those warm feelings. It also is a countermeasure to cortisol, which is, the chemical in our bodies that we generate when we're stressed out. And cortisol creates a lot of damage in our bodies. It can depresses your immune system, it causes inflammation, it increases your heart rate and your blood pressure, and oxytocin is an antidote to that. So those are the two of the ways that compassion creates biological changes in us that are good for our health. We are biologically endowed with tools. And social connectedness creates so when you're socially connected, it generates a positive feedback loop, all right? So the positive feedback loop is social, emotional, and physical well-being that we've talked about. So it's intimately connected. People who feel connected to others are more trusting and cooperative, and as are others to them who reciprocate with that. So, it's very important for our health to act compassionately. So we've got, I want to talk a little bit about how, before we get on to this next slide, how compassion is contagious, all right? So we talked about, we have these tools that help us connect to others, and it is intimately tied into our general health. But interestingly enough, we've had Jonathan Haidt, he's an NYU psychology professor, who's done some studies on what he has called elevation, right? So if we see somebody else being good, we're inspired to be good. And he calls that elevation. And it's interesting that it is contagious. So if we see someone else doing something great, we become elevated. We have the oxytocin, the warm feelings, and we are going to reach out and be kinder and compassionate with people that we encounter as a result of having witnessed or experienced compassion from someone else. Same with, generosity and kindness are part of that as well. They also, if you see someone being generous or kind, that's contagious. And also by uplifting others, we're helping ourselves. Happiness spreads. If people around us are happier, then we're also happier. And as we know, if we're compassionate and surrounded by compassionate people, we're going to also be healthier psychologically, physically, and just our overall well-being. So how do we become more compassionate? There's certain ways to do that. There's lots of practices out there. You may already be a compassionate person, but there's certain tools that we can do to foster compassion. So if we want to, we can practice active listening. And I've given a handout about that. So part of that is, we're so rushed and we're so hurried in our daily life that sometimes we forget to actually listen to anyone, whether it's our spouse, our children, our neighbor, our manager's not listening to employees, our clients that we don't listen to. How do we learn to stop and listen? And this active listening practice is just some step-by-step to help you learn to listen actively to people when they're talking to you. Because we can't respond to people compassionately if we really aren't fully listening to what they have to say, right? If we're not tuned in to what's going on with them. So part of this is, listen. Then you can, verbalize the other's point of view to make sure that you're understanding what they're saying. You acknowledge their emotions. Remember, compassion is not about judgment. Emotions aren't good or bad. We're not judging how they're feeling or how they're handling it. We're just listening. We're acknowledging how they feel. We're respecting that. And then, the thing that I was talking about, in all of this, we have to be quiet and allow others to voice their views and not interrupt. There's that, we've all heard about, how we're all kind of sitting around thinking about, wow, what somebody's talking, or thinking about something clever or cute, or, we're going to say in response. I mean, that's the opposite of active listening. We really need to be present. We need to be quiet, and we need to allow the other person to tell us how they feel. And this is in a professional setting. This is in a personal setting, wherever it may be. So I encourage you to read the handout and talk about, see if you can practice some active listening. Maybe there's somebody in your life that doesn't actively listen to you. Maybe they'd be open to practicing this active listening. And again, this has been developed by the psychologists who have done the research on compassion. This one in particular, I think, might be from a therapist, but it's very powerful. So I would, encourage you, if you want to become more compassionate, to practice that, look it over. So we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to skip to loving kindness meditation. So loving kindness meditation, I also have a handout on that, is basically spending a few minutes a day thinking about, just processing in your mind love for other people in your life, love for the world, good feelings, kindness. You spend some time thinking about that to generate some good feelings, some compassion internally that then will manifest itself in your actions. There are a lot of compassion training programs now that are available, mostly through the university. I think Stanford has one, Berkeley, maybe even Emory. And part of what they do is a meditation. They've actually established that people that meditate, who quiet their mind, are actually more compassionate. It creates changes in your brain. So that's a part of any compassion training program, and that's why the loving kindness meditation can work. And then we've got self-compassion, which I want to touch on. I think particularly for women, we often are, taking care of businesses, we may be parents, we may be aunts, we may be uncles, we may be spouses, partners. And in all of that, I think we're a little bit socially programmed to think first about the other person and last about ourselves. And that, again, compassion is thinking about other people, but not to the exclusion of taking care of ourselves. And Kristen Neff here at the University of Texas in Austin has done a lot of research on self-compassion and finding that it's critical to our own well-being, our own health, and our own success. So self-compassion is really compassion directed to ourselves. How would we treat, direct to ourselves when we've made mistakes or we've unhappy with some conduct we've engaged in? Treat ourselves the way we would treat a good friend who comes to us and tells us how disappointed they are in themselves or how they've made this mistake or something that they've done that they're ashamed of or upset about. We need to direct that compassion to ourselves. So there's 3 components that have been identified to self-compassion. And the first one I'm talking about is the self-kindness. Okay, we tend to judge and criticize ourselves very harshly. And we make a mistake, we revisit it in our mind, we ask ourselves, how could we do that? Why would we do that? I mean, we just, criticize ourselves constantly. And actually, that's really bad for you in terms of your health and in terms of your success in life. And not that we don't want to revisit maybe mistakes that we've made or things that we've done that we're not proud of. But there's a difference between looking at them in terms of, how can I avoid this next time? How can I make this right? And continually criticizing ourselves for it. That's very counterproductive. So when you find yourself doing that, stop and be kind to yourself. If you can't do it, take some practice. Remember, pretend that you're a friend and that your friend has told you this, and say to yourself what you would say to your friend who presented you with a similar situation. It's also good, besides not judging and criticizing ourselves, to recognize our common humanity. So sometimes when we can get in situations, and I think this is part of what happened with me when my husband was sick, you feel totally isolated. You're angry, you're maybe pitying yourself that this is, why has this happened to me? And I look around and everybody else is really happy and they don't seem to be having their problems. Their husband isn't dying. But it's good to put all of that in perspective and see that what we are going through is part of a larger human experience. I mean, people suffer. Other people that had spouses or family members that were, ill, they were going through something. So rather than separating myself and isolating myself out with being angry and bitter, to see it as a larger part of the human experience, that we're all in this together, helps to avoid some of the isolation that you feel when you're going through difficult times. And so it's good to, to go outside yourself, to recognize that we are all part of a human condition, and what you're going through is temporary, and that's part of our common humanity. Everyone is experiencing difficulties. And the last part is mindfulness. So we have, we tend, especially when we're busy, and I don't know, as a mom and a wife, you tend to just ignore your feelings, right? You're busy, you don't really have time to engage in what's going on with you. It'll pass, you don't want to pity yourself, you need to pick yourself up. Well, mindfulness is allowing you to experience the feelings that you're having. Okay, let's not ignore it. Let's not exaggerate it. Let's just honor what we're feeling right now and be aware of it. Because when you start ignoring it or exaggerating it, it becomes much more powerful. So those are the three elements of self-compassion. There are a lot of, I gave you some exercises on self-compassion. How do you build self-compassion? They're finding that self-compassion is actually much more important than self-esteem, because self-esteem is something that is based really on your performance. I mean, if you don't perform well or you don't do well, your self-esteem plummets. And so psychologists are replacing the concept of self-esteem with self-compassion, because self-compassion is where we, if we make a mistake, it's, we're not going to affect the way we feel about ourselves or how we perform, because we all know when we make mistakes, sometimes that can lead to more mistakes, because we can go into a downward cycle of being angry with yourself or depressed or whatever it may be. And when you practice that, you keep yourself from going to some of those darker places, and you're more able to pull yourself up and continue to move on in a healthy way for yourself and your family or your business or whatever people you may interact with in your life. So Kristen Neff also has, and I have a list of resources, she has a website for selfcompassion.org, and on there you can learn more about it. There are practices on there for you. She offers classes around the country, and if that's something you really think you need to work on, I think we all do, then that would be a good place for you to start. But I want to conclude by saying that research shows that when you live your life compassionately and caring and showing that you care, you breed trust around you. You inspire others and uplift them because they feel closer to you. You'll become more successful, but you'll also significantly, positively improve your health and well-being. And your compassion is contagious. It benefits those around you in turn, which in turn will benefit you. So part of what I did in writing my book, my adult book, I have a children's book where a child becomes a superhero because he's kind and compassionate. Just got a little tired of superheroes being people who hit and are physically strong. So the story of him is that he's kind and he's compassionate, and he becomes a superhero because of that. But the adult book is about creating connections. So I think you can see at the heart of all of compassion is meaningful connections. Compassion is what helps us connect to other people in positive ways. And when we feel connected, we're happier, we're healthier. And so if you can share your story, which is what I've done in my book, is I share my story. I've led book groups, and the idea is when you share your story, other people will share their story with you. And when you share your stories, you become connected in a non-judgmental way, of course. But, we don't interact with people in communities necessarily anymore. We don't know people's stories. And we've become, I think, a world where so much is image. You're afraid especially at the professional level, to admit that you have any weaknesses or that you've made any mistakes or that you're not, quote, perfect. But actually, when you are vulnerable with other people, they will be vulnerable with you. And then you will form connections that are very meaningful and very deep. And so I'd encourage you to start sharing your story as I've done mine. And like I said, the point of mine is to lay my life out there with all the mistakes that I've made in hopes that you'll feel comfortable enough to share your story. As a litigation attorney, I always felt like, and I've been one for about 35 years, so I always felt like we as women, so when I graduated from law school, it was when the first wave of women, at least in the US, were coming into the law field, and there weren't many women yet in the litigation field. So I always felt like, we women had to kind of mold ourselves to fit the way the business world had been created by the men, obviously, that had the power at the time. And so you lost your compassion. I mean, you may have experienced it a little bit occasionally for a client, but compassion was seen as very weak. You were weak if you were compassionate. And I'd like to see, maybe that's something we women can do, is to mold the work world and the professional world more in the way we want to live our lives. And I think research has shown we tend to be more compassionate. Maybe this is our opportunity, professionally and personally, of course, but professionally, to bring compassion into the workplace and be a reflection of who we are and how we want our world to look. So that's part of my challenge to you. Again, and if you are concerned about, bringing compassion into the workplace, how is everyone going to look at you? You can look back over the research that's been done that I presented in my talk and in my PowerPoint, and know that there is support that if you live this way, you will be successful, obviously personally, but also professionally. Your business, everything about your business will improve. The bottom line, your client relationships, you'll make more money. You'll be happier going to work. Everybody will be healthier. You'll probably have less employee absences. So, think about that as you, maybe tiptoe out there to try to introduce some compassion into your professional life. I know it's a bit scary, and also remember, as a compassionate person, it works. It's going to take a little more time. I think that's one reason that people don't act compassionately. It takes time to build relationships, meaningful relationships. If you're a leader and you can kind of bully somebody into getting a project done or doing what you want them to do, that's probably a little faster. But compassion takes time. It's about building meaningful relationships. It's not going to happen overnight. The culture of the company is not going to happen. It's not going to change overnight. It requires some patience. And honestly, if you are going to become acting more compassionately in the business world, you do have to have some strategies not to be taken advantage of. There's a difference between compassionate and being a doormat. And I think that's a little bit different for everybody, depending on where you are, what profession you're in. But it will work. You'll have to have some strategies for it, but it will improve everything about your business. It'll just create success for you in all areas of your life. So I thank everybody for listening. I am available anytime by email to answer any questions or give you any information or talk to you about compassion in your workplace or your life. I have a list of resources for those of you that are interested in reading more about the subject. There's tons of information out there, but I have a list of some of the more recent ones. If you want to email me, I'm happy to send that to you. And you can start on your own journey about learning about this. But it's fascinating subject. It's wonderful to know that compassion will make us successful, that it's contagious, that it's good for all of us. And like I said, my goal is that if we were all compassionate with everyone we meet and in everything we do, it would spread and we can live in a compassionate world where everyone will thrive and be respected. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Virginia, for taking us on this journey of compassion and how we can incorporate more compassion into our lives, into the lives of others. Very important work that you've been doing, and appreciate you sharing this with us. Does anyone have any questions that you would like to ask? At this point, you can take your microphone off mute if you want to ask via audio. Jerry has asked, do you find that men have an interest in learning to be more compassionate?
I don't think so. I'm in my 60s. I'd say my generation, not particularly, but I do see a lot of progress with the younger men. They're more involved with my sons. They're more involved in childcare. They're more open to it. I think my age group, maybe not. But I think as they're getting the message, there are people that are talking to some of the Fortune 500 companies about these subjects. And I think as it becomes more of our conversation nationally and internationally, I think men, when they think it's going to make more money for their business, are probably going to really be interested in it.
You all be compassionate now.
If they can develop the skills, I don't know. It's socialized, but I'd like to think so. Yes. I haven't had a lot of luck with litigation attorneys.
Yeah, I could see why.
they probably need the message more than anyone. They're probably the least receptive to it. But I think this is going to get out there more, and they're trying to raise the profile of it and let us know how important this is. So I'm hoping that it'll get out there. But it is going to be a hard sell.
Yeah, I've noticed too that there seems to be a link between compassion and spirituality. I'm not talking about religion because I'm not going to go down that road, but I often find that men in particular that are more spiritual have more compassion typically.
Yes, I agree. And spirituality, they've always wondered why people who are ill, when people will come to pray for them at their bedside, recover. I mean, a lot of that is what I'm talking about. They feel the love, they feel the compassion, and that can actually help improve your health. Yeah, spirituality, I agree, is very important. And I think that's why when I was a kid, it wasn't such a big subject because, whether you wanted to or not, you kind of went to church. It was part of our psyche more. You cared about your neighbors, you cared about kids at school, you cared about people at church. And I think as we've become more anonymous, we've gotten away from that. And so I think that's why it's important to spread this message. That it really will make you more successful. And I think that will get people's attention. The fact that it actually promotes their health. I do a lot of health talks because I think generally, let's face it, we're all pretty self-interested. And if you can get someone to think, wow, this is really good for my health, and they start practicing it, as we see, it's contagious and it will start spreading. So.
Interesting. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Yes, Virginia, this is Poonam here. A wonderful session. I truly enjoyed it. When you were talking about self-focus, a thought came to my mind. I understand what you're saying, but there is a difference between self-centered and self-focused in my mind. I do think, it's a good idea to take care of yourself, understand yourself, like that self-awareness. And you need some focus on yourself, your inner world, to, acknowledge your emotions or, change the way you are feeling. So what are your thoughts on self-focused versus self-centered?
Well, remember that what I'm giving you here is words as they're defined by the psychologists that have studied this. So when they are referring to self-focus, they are referring to somewhat of an unhealthy level of self-focus. So and they're referring to people that only focus on their self.
Like selfish, they're selfish motives.
Yes. Almost to the level of narcissists. Okay. We all know narcissists that basically, only really care about themselves. That's the way they're defining it for purposes of their research. So those findings are specific to those type of people. What you're talking about, I agree, is self-focus, but I think they want to shift the conversation to self-compassion more. So yes, you want to be aware of how you feel. You want to care about yourself. And they're shifting that to the self-compassion component of our conversation. Because I think a lot of what you were talking about, acknowledging how you feel, caring about yourself, is self-compassion. And that is where they're shifting their focus right now. So remember, when I say self-focus, again, the psychologists are referring that to an unhealthy self-focus. Those are the people that are the narcissists that only focus on themselves or focus on themselves to an unhealthy level, to the exclusion of thinking about anyone else.
Thank you so much for clarifying that.
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. And please feel free to email me, anybody with any questions you may have. I'm happy to answer anything. I love this subject. I hope we can all spread the word about the power and magic of compassion in our lives, and let's build a compassionate world together.
It sounds great. And, speaking of stories, so our next session Poonam is doing, it's on empowerment lessons from her autobiography. And she is probably one of the most compassionate people at Global Tech Women. So I think that there's a lot of synergy between the talk that you just gave and with Poonam's talk coming up next. I'm going to put the link to the Zoom session that will be happening in about 7-8 minutes. So I'm hoping that you all will come on over and we can talk about her autobiography and how she's been able to traverse a number of challenges throughout her life, and how she's used compassion to create a fulfilling life for herself. So
that sounds interesting. That's pretty much what I've discovered through my life, is the healing power of compassion.
Yeah. There's a lot of similarities between what you've done and what she's done. So it's interesting how you both ended up next to each other at Voices.
I love it. Well, I will listen, and I just tell everybody, remember, true power is really caring about other people. That's where we get our true enduring power from.
Yeah, that's so true. I remember when we were going through the Great Recession, and a lot of people were out of work, and we were kind of telling each other, go volunteer, don't just sit in the house, absolutely go take care of things and try to look for a job. But, instead of sitting around, go help others, because it really helps your mind, your health, your well-being by, thinking about other people and not worrying so much about yourself.
Yes, get away from the self-focus. Yeah.
Yeah.
Research proves that.
Yeah.
So I think these are things we've all kind of known, but isn't it great to have the social scientists and the psychologists bringing all this research that say, yes, this is absolutely the case.
Yep, completely agree.
Or especially when you're dealing with people that think it's kind of a soft topic. The psychologists are saying it's not a soft topic. It's very important. Thinking that it's just relegated to church or maybe in our relationships. It's a topic and a way to live in all areas of our life.
Absolutely, Virginia. And I am seeing a shift in technology. I am in technology sector. I do see, leaders are talking about it. We are having sessions in our companies. Mindfulness is now accepted everywhere, right? So spirituality is pretty much needed because we all are human beings. We are spirit, right? So I think that identity crisis, what we are going through today, we are forgetting who we are. We are just putting labels on ourselves, going back to our roots. The kindness you talked about, compassion you talked about, that's very much needed in today's world.
I agree. And I think the technology companies are kind of leading the charge in terms of this, because they recognize that creativity comes from a compassionate workplace and collaboration and, good ideas. I think, they're at the forefront, I think, of this, and they're a good model for us. I think it's a little bit, doesn't necessarily trickle down to some of our other businesses. Like I said, the legal business and some other businesses haven't quite got the message, but it's nice to know that technology is doing it, and I think leading the way on this. They're very enlightened, I think.
All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and close. So this recording will be online. There's going to be a delay on this recording because we're hosting 2 more sessions back to back, and I'm not sure I will be able to get it up online. So there might be about an hour or 2 delay until this session is up on the website, but I'll get it up there as soon as I can. And all of the resources are already there. All of the handouts that Virginia had brought up earlier have been put up there, and they're ready
Great. And
to be
email me if
reviewed.
you want my list of resources that I have. I can probably send it to you too, Deanna, but I've got a list of reading for people that are interested in maybe pursuing this some more.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the offer.
Thank you. Thank you for everything. Thank you for putting this on. It's wonderful.
Oh, sure. Happy to do it. All right. Well, thank you so much, and I hope to see you all at our next session.
Thank you.